Let me tell you about the time the Homeowners Association tried to squeeze me for lake access, and how that little power play ended with me holding the entire neighborhood hostage. With electricity. Yes, you heard that right. Electricity. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. It all began with the boat. Not just any boat, mind you. This was the Albatross, a vintage Chris Craft mahogany runabout, lovingly restored to its former glory. Think James Bond on a budget. I, John Smith, software engineer by day, aspiring nautical enthusiast by weekend, had poured my blood, sweat, and a considerable amount of my retirement savings into that boat. After years of coding in a windowless office, the thought of cruising on Lake Serenity, wind in my hair, what little I had left, was the only thing keeping me sane. So naturally, I bought a house right on the lake. A quaint little bungalow with a dock that was practically begging for the Albatross to call it home. I envisioned lazy afternoons spent fishing, sunset cocktails on the deck, and the sweet sound of a vintage engine purring on the water. What I didn't envision was Karen. Karen, the self-appointed queen of the Lake Serenity Homeowners Association. A woman whose spirit animal was a meticulously groomed poodle, and whose life's mission was to ensure that everyone's lawn was precisely 2.5 inches high. Karen, with her perfectly coiffed helmet of blonde hair, her oversized sunglasses that could detect even the slightest deviation from the HOA's draconian rules, and her voice that could shatter glass at 50 paces. The day after I moved in, a welcome packet appeared on my doorstep. Inside, nestled amongst the pamphlets about proper garbage disposal and acceptable paint colors, was the Lake Access Agreement, a document so convoluted and riddled with legalese that it made my head spin. In essence, it stated that in order to enjoy the privilege of using the lake that my property directly bordered, I would have to pay an annual fee of $5,000. $5,000 for a lake I already owned a piece of. I nearly choked on my morning coffee. This was highway robbery, suburban style. I marched over to Karen's house, determined to reason with her. I was met at the door by a tiny, yapping poodle with an attitude problem. "Yes," Karen said, peering down at me over her sunglasses as if I were a particularly unpleasant garden slug. "Karen, I'm John Smith, the new homeowner at 14 Maple Drive. I wanted to discuss the Lake Access Agreement." "Ah, yes," she said, a predatory glint in her eye. "The agreement is quite straightforward, really. $5,000 annually for lake access. Think of it as an investment in our community." "An investment?" "Karen, I already pay property taxes, and my property literally touches the lake. It's like charging me to walk across my own lawn." Karen's smile tightened. "The Lake Serenity HOA operates on a strict budget. The lake requires maintenance, algae control, boat inspections, the occasional swan rescue." "Swan rescue?" I raised an eyebrow. "Are you telling me you have a dedicated swan rescue team?" "We must be prepared for all eventualities," she said, puffing out her chest. I could see that reasoning was futile. Karen was operating on a different plane of reality, one where the HOA was a benevolent dictatorship and she was the supreme ruler. "I'm not paying it," I said, standing my ground. "I own the property. I have the right to use the lake." Karen's eyes narrowed. "You'll find that non-compliance with HOA regulations has consequences, Mr. Smith." And that's when the harassment started. It began subtly with passive-aggressive notes left on my door. "Your lawn is 0.3 inches too long. Your garbage cans were left out for 15 minutes past the designated pickup time. Your choice of lawn ornaments is unconventional. I had a gnome collection, sue me." Then it escalated. My mail started disappearing. My car was mysteriously egged. And one morning, I woke up to find my beloved Albatross sitting lopsided in the water, its hull riddled with what appeared to be BB gun pellets. I was furious. This was no longer about a lake access fee. This was about Karen, her petty tyranny, and her unwavering belief that she could control every aspect of my life. So I decided to fight back. I started attending HOA meetings, armed with a thick file of documents and a burning desire to expose Karen's reign of terror. I questioned every expenditure, challenged every rule, and generally made myself a royal pain in her perfectly manicured behind. The other residents, initially hesitant to speak out, started to rally behind me. They were tired of Karen's dictatorial style, her constant nagging, and her exorbitant fees. A rebellion was brewing in Lake Serenity, and I was leading the charge. But Karen wasn't going down without a fight. One night, I awoke to the smell of gasoline. I rushed outside to find the albatross engulfed in flames, the inferno lighting up the night sky. My boat, my beautiful boat, reduced to ashes in a matter of minutes. As I stood there, watching the flames consume my dreams, I knew that Karen had crossed a line. This was no longer just about petty harassment. This was about malice, about destruction, about pure, unadulterated evil. And that's when I vowed to make her pay. The police investigation was a joke. Karen, of course, denied any involvement, claiming she was at home, baking cookies for the annual HOA bake sale. I later learned the cookies were store-bought. The case went cold, but I wasn't giving up. I decided to launch my own investigation. I spent weeks digging through property records, HOA documents, and county archives, searching for anything at all that I could use against Karen. And then I found it, a tiny, almost insignificant clause in a decades-old easement agreement. A clause that stated that my property, and my property alone, owned the land directly beneath the Lake Serenity power grid. The power grid that supplied electricity to every single house in the HOA. A slow, evil smile spread across my face. Karen had just given me the ultimate weapon, and I was about to use it to unleash a storm of biblical proportions on her perfectly manicured suburban paradise. The game had officially changed. Now it was my turn to play dirty. And trust me, I know how to write code. Karen may have burned my boat, but I was about to short-circuit her entire existence. My first move was reconnaissance. I needed to understand the Lake Serenity power grid inside and out. Luckily, I'm a software engineer. I can decipher arcane technical manuals and wrangle complex systems in my sleep. I spent days poring over schematics, diagrams, and obscure utility company reports, piecing together the puzzle of how the electricity flowed through this meticulously planned community. It turned out the grid was surprisingly vulnerable. A single point of failure, a master control box located conveniently close to my property line, could plunge the entire neighborhood into darkness. And thanks to that long-forgotten easement, I held the key. But simply cutting off the power wouldn't be enough. That would be crude, unsubtle. Karen deserved something more artistic. I needed to inflict maximum chaos with minimal effort, the kind of targeted disruption that would drive her absolutely batty. My weapon of choice? The Internet of Things. Those trendy smart devices that everyone was so obsessed with, the smart thermostats, the smart lights, the smart refrigerators, all connected to the same vulnerable power grid. It was an open invitation for a digital puppet master like myself. I started small. One evening, I remotely adjusted Karen's thermostat to a balmy 85 degrees. Then, I remotely turned all of her smart lights on and off in a frantic, strobe-like sequence. A minor inconvenience, perhaps, but a sign of things to come. The next day at the HOA meeting, Karen looked frazzled. Her helmet of blonde hair was slightly askew, and her voice had a noticeable tremor. "Someone," she said, glaring in my direction, "has been tampering with my smart home devices." I feigned innocence. "Really, Karen? That's terrible. Have you tried turning them off and on again?" A few residents chuckled. Karen's face turned an alarming shade of red. I escalated things gradually. I programmed her sprinkler system to activate every hour, drenching her meticulously manicured lawn in the middle of the night. I changed her smart TV's default language to Klingon. And, in my piece de resistance, I rigged her smart coffee maker to brew exclusively decaf. Karen was losing it. She accused me of everything short of witchcraft. She called the police, who, after a cursory investigation, informed her that tampering with a smart thermostat was not technically a crime. She hired a cybersecurity expert, who, after a week of fruitless searching, declared her home network impenetrable. I had, of course, taken steps to cover my digital tracks. The HOA meetings became a theater of the absurd. Karen would rant about the cyber terrorism she was experiencing, while the other residents exchanged nervous glances and tried to subtly edge away from her. Some even started to sympathize with me. After all, Karen had been a tyrant for far too long. Then, the sugar in her gas tank. I had no idea who did that, but I sure wasn't going to claim responsibility. Let her think she had enemies everywhere. But the burning of the albatross pushed me over the edge. I had proof this time. A neighbor's security camera had a partial license plate. I took the partial plate to the police and they dismissed it. Something had to give. "All right, Karen, time to take things up a notch," I mumbled to myself one evening. My final act of revenge was a masterpiece of digital manipulation. I waited for a particularly hot and humid day, when the entire neighborhood was relying on their air conditioners to survive. Then, using a custom-built algorithm, I created a series of cascading power surges throughout the grid. One by one, the smart thermostats in Lake Serenity malfunctioned, sending temperatures soaring to unbearable levels. The smart lights flickered and died. The smart refrigerators went into defrost mode, turning freezers into lukewarm incubators. Chaos erupted. Residents spilled out into the streets, fanning themselves with HOA newsletters and cursing the summer heat. Karen, her face flushed and her hair plastered to her forehead, emerged from her house like a wrathful goddess. "Smith!" she shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at me. "You did this, didn't you?" I simply smiled. "Did what, Karen? It's just a power outage. Happens all the time." But that wasn't the end. Not even close, because I was about to leverage my newfound power over the Lake Serenity power grid to achieve something far more satisfying than mere revenge. I was about to become the hero of my own twisted suburban fairy tale. And Karen? Well, let's just say she was about to learn a very valuable lesson about the dangers of messing with a software engineer. My next HOA meeting was going to be lit. And by lit, I mean powered by my power. The power she was about to pay for. The blackout was my opening act, a prelude to the real performance. Karen and the HOA thought they could bully me, burn my boat, and get away with it. They had another thing coming. Now that I had their attention and their electricity supply, I was ready to dictate the terms. The day after the Great Lake Serenity blackout of 25, I sent a letter to every resident outlining my demands. The lake access agreement was to be abolished, HOA fees were to be cut in half, and Karen was to publicly apologize for her tyrannical reign. And, of course, they were all going to pay me a monthly fee for the use of my power grid. A grid access fee, if you will. The letter caused a frenzy. Some residents were outraged, accusing me of extortion. Others were secretly thrilled, seeing me as a champion of the downtrodden. And Karen? Well, let's just say her blood pressure was probably reaching critical levels. The HOA called an emergency meeting, which I, of course, attended. The room was packed, the air thick with tension. Karen, looking like she'd aged 10 years in the past 24 hours, glared at me from the head of the table. "Smith," she hissed, "this is outrageous. You can't just hold us hostage with our own electricity." "Actually, Karen," I said, pulling out the easement agreement, "I can, and I am, legally. You see, due to a minor oversight on the part of the developers, I own the land under the power grid, which means technically I own the power grid. So, unless you want to go back to living in the dark ages, I suggest you listen to my terms." A murmur rippled through the room. Many of the residents were seeing the document for the first time, and the realization that I held all the cards was slowly sinking in. "This is blackmail," Karen shrieked. "You're a common criminal." "I prefer strategic asset manager," I replied with a shrug. "But feel free to call me whatever you like, as long as you're paying your grid access fee on time." The debate raged for hours. Karen and her loyalists argued that I was destroying the community, while the more rebellious residents argued that I was simply leveling the playing field. Finally, after a particularly impassioned speech by Mrs. Henderson, the elderly woman whose prize-winning roses had been repeatedly targeted by Karen's nitpicking, a vote was called, and I won. By a landslide, the lake access agreement was abolished. HOA fees were slashed, and Karen was forced to issue a public apology, which I insisted be delivered while wearing a sandwich board that read, "I'm sorry for being a suburban tyrant. Imagine a scene." Karen, looking utterly defeated, standing in the middle of the town square, wearing the sandwich board and mumbling an insincere apology. But the grid access fee was where things got really interesting. I wasn't interested in getting rich. I wanted to make a point. So, I set the fee at a ridiculously low rate, just enough to cover the cost of maintaining the grid and to fund community projects. Then, I did something truly audacious. I announced that all profits from the grid access fee would be donated to a local charity that provided legal assistance to homeowners fighting against abusive HOAs. The irony was delicious. Karen was furious. She tried to rally her supporters, but her power had been broken. The residents of Lake Serenity had tasted freedom, and they weren't about to go back to living under her thumb. She even tried to sabotage the power grid, hiring a shady electrician to accidentally damage the master control box. But I was one step ahead of her. I'd installed a sophisticated security system, complete with surveillance cameras and motion sensors. The electrician was apprehended, Karen was implicated, and the whole sorry affair ended with her being fined and sentenced to community service. Imagine a scene. Karen, dressed in an orange jumpsuit, picking up trash on the side of the road, glaring daggers at passing motorists. With Karen effectively neutralized, I turned my attention to reforming the HOA. I implemented a new set of rules designed to protect homeowners from abuse and to promote transparency and accountability. I even established a grievance committee dedicated to resolving disputes fairly and impartially. Lake Serenity was transformed. The atmosphere became more relaxed, more neighborly. People started talking to each other, organizing community events, and generally enjoying life without the constant fear of Karen's judgment. But my revenge wasn't complete. Not yet. I still needed to find out who had burned my boat. The police investigation had stalled, but I had a hunch. I reviewed the security camera footage from the night of the fire, frame by frame, looking for any clue, any sign of who might have been responsible. And then I saw it, a shadowy figure lurking near my property, carrying a gas can. The figure was obscured by the darkness, but I recognized the gait, the distinctive way they walked. It wasn't Karen. It was Bob, the mild-mannered accountant who lived across the street. Bob, who had always been polite, friendly, and seemingly harmless. I confronted Bob and he confessed. He admitted that he had burned my boat out of jealousy. He had always envied my success, my independence, and my ability to stand up to Karen. I was stunned. I had been so focused on Karen that I hadn't even considered the possibility that someone else might be responsible. I could have pressed charges, had Bob arrested, and ruined his life. But something stopped me. I looked at his tearful face, his obvious remorse, and I realized that he was just another victim of Karen's toxic environment. So I did something unexpected. I forgave him. I told him that I understood his motives, and that I wouldn't press charges if he agreed to help me rebuild my boat. Bob readily agreed, and over the next few months, we worked side by side, sanding, painting, and hammering, slowly bringing the albatross back to life. In the end, the burning of my boat and my subsequent revenge against Karen had inadvertently brought our community closer together. We had faced adversity, we had fought for our freedom, and we had emerged stronger, more united, and more electrified. And as for Karen, well, she eventually moved away, unable to cope with the new Lake Serenity. Some say she's now terrorizing a retirement community in Florida, meticulously enforcing the shuffleboard rules. But that's another story. The moral of this one? Don't mess with a software engineer who owns your power grid. You might just get a shocking surprise. So Bob and I rebuilt the albatross. It wasn't quite the same, not exactly, but it was better. It was ours. Rebuilt with forgiveness, powered by community, and slightly more fire-resistant, just in case. Life in Lake Serenity settled into a new normal. HOA meetings were actually productive. We replaced the draconian rules with common-sense guidelines. We even started a community garden, where residents could grow their own organic vegetables, free from the tyranny of perfectly manicured lawns. The grid access fee, despite its initially controversial reception, became a source of pride. We funded scholarships for local students, supported the volunteer fire department, and even installed a solar array on the community center, further reducing our reliance on the traditional power grid. But the most surprising thing of all was that John Smith, the introverted software engineer who just wanted to enjoy his boat in peace, had become a leader. People actually looked up to me, sought my advice, and, dare I say it, even liked me. It was all rather unsettling. One afternoon, while I was working on the Albatross, Bob came over, a sheepish grin on his face. "John," he said, "I wanted to ask you something." "Shoot, Bob," I said, wiping grease from my hands. "Well," he stammered, "the HOA is having elections next month, and, well, some of the residents think you should run for president." I nearly dropped my wrench. "President? Bob, I'm a software engineer, not a politician. I don't even own a suit." I know, Bob said. "But people trust you, John. You stood up to Karen, you reformed the HOA, you brought the community together. You'd be a great president." I thought about it for a moment. Being HOA president meant more meetings, more paperwork, more dealing with the endless minutiae of suburban life. But it also meant the opportunity to continue making a positive impact on the community. And let's be honest, the chance to lord it over Karen, should she ever decide to return, was also rather appealing. "All right, Bob," I said with a sigh. "I'll do it." The election was a formality. I won by a landslide, receiving every single vote except, presumably, Karen's, wherever she was. And so, I became the president of the Lake Serenity Homeowners Association. A title I never sought, a responsibility I never expected, but one I embraced with a mixture of trepidation and enthusiasm. My first act as president was to propose a new amendment to the HOA bylaws. An amendment that stated, in no uncertain terms, that no HOA regulation shall ever be enforced in a manner that infringes upon the basic human right to enjoy one's own property, unless said enjoyment involves excessively loud polka music or the unauthorized use of a leaf blower before 9 a.m. The amendment passed unanimously. Life in Lake Serenity continued to improve. We organized community barbecues, neighborhood watch programs, and even a Decorate Your Dock competition. The lake became a hub of activity, with boats of all shapes and sizes gliding across the water. And the Albatross? Well, she was the queen of the lake. I spent countless hours cruising around, enjoying the sun, the wind, and the sweet sound of that vintage engine. One evening, as I was returning to my dock after a particularly glorious sunset cruise, I saw a familiar figure standing on the shore. It was Karen. She looked different, older, more subdued. The helmet of blonde hair was gone, replaced by a simple, graying bob. The oversized sunglasses were nowhere to be seen. "John," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Can I talk to you?" I hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "Sure, Karen. What's on your mind?" She took a deep breath. "I just wanted to say, I was wrong. About everything. I let the power go to my head. I became obsessed with control. I hurt a lot of people, including you." I looked at her, really looked at her, and I saw genuine remorse in her eyes. "I forgive you, Karen," I said. "It's time to move on." She smiled, a sad, wistful smile. "Thank you, John. That means a lot." And then, she turned and walked away, disappearing into the twilight. I never saw Karen again, but I often think about her, and I hope that she found peace, wherever she is. As for me, I continued to serve as HOA president for many years, always striving to make Lake Serenity a better place to live. I learned a lot about leadership, about community, and about the importance of forgiveness. And, of course, I continued to enjoy my boat. So that's the story of how I fought the HOA, burned some bridges and a boat, and ended up owning the power grid. It's a story of revenge, redemption, and the surprising power of electricity. And now, if you've enjoyed this tale of suburban mayhem, be sure to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel for more outrageous stories, and leave a comment below to let me know what you think. And don't forget to share this video with your friends. especially if they're dealing with a tyrannical HOA of their own. Because sometimes all you need to fight the system is a little bit of ingenuity, a lot of courage, and a strategically placed easement. Thanks for watching, and stay powered up.